But sometimes, something so bad happens that a terrible sadness is carried with it.
2024's The Crow is one such bad thing.
Oh, wait, you serious?
Seriously, if Megan Fox and Machine Gun Kelly decided to pen a feature-length film about their highly degenerate and questionable Hollywood romance, you'd likely end up with Rupert Sanders' reimagining of The Crow.
That's kind of harsh.
It's a harsh world.
At its core, The Crow lacks substance and identity, foregoing all the elements that made the 1989 comic and 1994 film adaptation beloved, for something directionless, soulless, and overly bland. There is absolutely nothing salvageable from this reboot, which more or less has been through development hell since 2008, burning through directors, writers, and leads. Hey, maybe Borderlands does have some competition with this one.
What? I'm expelling the excess lead. Oh, big bullet coming.
2024's The Crow takes place in a modern day somewhere in Europe, where a downtrodden, drug-addled Post Malone, Eric Draven, has come full circle from a life of neglect and abuse and been condemned to what looks like a government-sanctioned rehabilitation facility, equipped with ankle monitors, military drills, and uneventful group therapy sessions. One day, Eric meets Shelley, also a drug addict, who got involved with a crime syndicate and found herself on the run before getting arrested for possession. The pair quickly notice a magnetism between them, and upon Shelley's crime cohorts finding her, the two escape and shack up in a friend's apartment. Unfortunately, not all is well, as pretty quickly Shelley and Eric are killed by her enemies, and upon witnessing Shelley's death, Eric Draven is resurrected as the Crow, and sent on a mission to kill those who killed Shelley in hopes that his quest for vengeance will bring her back from the dead. The Crow suffers from so many basic issues that it really shouldn't, not just as an adaptation or reboot, but as a film overall. Basic character development, continuity between scenes, and proper world building are just a few of them, which puts this movie almost on par with Madam Web as one of the most empty adaptations to hit the big screen. The biggest of these issues is that it has no identity. And it's uncertain if that's due to the lengthy production development behind it or incompetent writers that took more inspiration from TikTok reels and AI prompts than the source material. What shines about 1994's Crow is that despite its poorly aged style, it knows what it's trying to be. It doesn't require a background story or foundation and shows us who Eric Draven is through his struggle to comprehend and later accept the loss of his true love. As a result, all his actions, both in his violent kills and softer interactions with secondary characters Sarah and Albright, are purposeful and allows us as viewers to empathize with a character who starkly contrasts our fundamental moral compass. This new version removes all of that, painting a backstory for Eric Draven that is derivative at best, and foregoing all inspiration, giving Eric a tragic early childhood that can be interpreted as Zack Snyder's take on Artax's death in the Swamp of Sadness from Neverending Story.
Say what?
Eric Draven is Eric Draven only in name, and aside from that has absolutely no relation to the iconic character. Shelley is instead our main character for much of the film, creating a lengthy background for a character that didn't need one, and was also supposed to be a pure representation of love and companionship. Instead, Shelley is dragged down to a lowly drug addict and murderer, and turned into what Eric was in the comic and 1994 film.
What?
Shelley essentially wears the pants in this dynamic, and it's not a switch that ever feels justified, given that the actress has all the on-screen charm of a used Bussy tampon.
Brittany, what you were thinking it? Yeah, well, you said it.
She's the one that confronts Eric at first at the facility, and she even attempts to mimic the humor Eric displayed in the previous film adaptation. She provides him with a place to stay, clothes to wear, money to use, and in the moments that are meant to highlight their their developing romance, Shelley is the one who takes the front and center of the scene, going so far as to tell Eric that if she's ever hard to love her harder. Female accountability 101 right there. After her death, even the way Eric approaches his realizations of Shelley's wrongdoings and struggle to stay in love with her is feminized for what seems to be no other reason than to put Shelley on a pedestal. Yeah, for real, true love never dies unless you learn your girlfriend committed murder. When whimpering, wailing, wussified Eric finally does become the Crow, it isn't till the last 25 minutes of the film, and despite some pretty solid action sequences, his transition into a ruthless killer carries no impact, as the film doesn't spend the time to properly develop who Eric is and how he loves. The new dynamic for Eric and Shelley highlights what this movie's absolute biggest problem is. It doesn't understand love and loss. As an audience, one of the most alluring things about cinema is not just its ability to present us with stories out of this world, but adapting them to appeal to the humanity within us all. Some of film's more revered and memorable moments call to the parts of us that we all share in some form or another, whether that be embarrassment, sadness, or happiness. 1989's The Crow comic was born out of sadness. Creator James O'Barr wrote the first issue as a way to cope with the tragedy of losing his fiancée to a drunk driver. He noted that he had a very difficult childhood, and meeting his then fiancée at 16 brought a light to his life that he'd never seen before. As a blossoming artist and writer, O'Barr began working on The Crow in the wake of losing her, putting a lot of his anger and heartache into the protagonist. Thus, Eric Draven is the representation of the lifelong darkness he's had to wither through, with the comics being deliberately colored black and white to reflect the often singular feelings of grief, agony, and loss. Eric Draven and Shelley aside, the comic is intentional in everything it displays. In an interview back in 2000, O'Barr stated that he based every character in the comic on either people he knew or on the most self-destructive sides of his own personality. Alex Proyas's 1994 film adaptation does justice to O'Barr's published works, capturing everything down to the gothic overtones, grungy exteriors, and complexity of Eric Draven himself. While we don't get many moments of Eric simmering in his own sadness, for the sake of the film, the heavy emphasis on action is enough to usher in those feelings of love, pain, and the anger associated with loss. 2024's adaptation has none of this and is very much adapted by screenwriters and a director that don't understand feelings. Eric and Shelley's love story is reduced down to montages more reminiscent of that one summer you spent hopped up on Molly, rather than focusing on the purpose and happiness she gave Eric. After years of incompetent writing across every corner of Hollywood, this shouldn't be surprising. But honestly, the inability to translate love and loss so simply into a tale of revenge was frightening to me. We have writers and directors that are attempting to appeal to audiences that don't understand what audiences feel, and have stripped such a heartbreaking tale and character down to long, brooding walking sequences through a faceless city. Since stakes aren't established through Eric's love for Shelley or his quest for vengeance, and since the writers don't understand basic human emotion, there's a very unsatisfactory attempt to establish them elsewhere by cultivating a half-baked supernatural villain. Vincent Rogue isn't so much of an antagonist as he is a placeholder for a character. The 1994 adaptation did something similar by introducing Top Dollar as a more central crime boss, but unlike this film, serves simply as a visual manifestation of the emotions Eric feels and the evils of the city. It was a twist that worked exceptionally well for that adaptation for the purpose of adhering to the standard movie formula. Vincent Rogue is a crime boss that does stuff and has a pact with the devil that requires him to corrupt pure souls for harvest in exchange for immortality. This is why he targets Shelley and her friends, as they aren't standard criminals or addicts who are already guaranteed to go to hell. There's a video that Shelley and her friends somehow get a hold of that shows Vincent using his eyeball powers to make Shelley kill someone. And this video allegedly has the risk of ruining his image completely, but an image that we only see built up through his love for classical music and opera. Since he has this ability to eyeball people and apparently steal their memories through blood, this is how he finds out that Eric possesses the ability to evade death. And something I guess Vincent wants now because he clearly wasn't having fun sacrificing people in the first half of the film. Vincent Roque has less than 5 minutes of total screen time, and all of his scenes are just heavy exposition, telling the audience why he's evil, instead of showing us he's evil. His henchmen pose just as little a threat, and the supernatural element that was introduced is quickly forgotten for the bulk of the film, as it never actually influences any of the narrative. So, since stakes aren't established here either, then it's absolutely lost in the setting of The Crow. What makes the highly stylized 1994 film so memorable is that the evil Eric Draven encounters and the loss he has to confront are reflected in the cityscape around him. James O'Barr had stated several times that even the buildings in the panels of his comic were inspired by real places and purposefully included to match the tone he was going for. So the film does justice to this, eliminating the black and white coloring for a bleak, soulless city that adapts flickers of color and is just as edgy as its characters. Reimagining The Crow as an isolated idea in a city that has as much personality as your characters does nothing more than bore your audience. The city has no name, but the buildings are all reminiscent of modern-day 15-minute cities and are filtered through a blue lens to add aesthetic. I would argue that this adaptation could have been salvageable if it at least tried to display emotion in its settings, but it fails miserably at that too. Never once does it feel like the world is against Eric and Shelley's desires, nor does it feel like Vincent has any actual power in it. 2024's The Crow ultimately does more harm than good, as it unintentionally acts as a prime example of Hollywood's increasing incompetence. The Crow lacks not just vision, emotion, and themes from its source material and previous adaptations, but any semblance of the creative prowess the industry once had. A wonderfully enticing character and premise has been reduced down to an overly safe production that serves more as a piece of content than actual entertainment. And that honestly doesn't instill any hope for the numerous adaptations releasing in the next few years. But at least Bill Skarsgard will be able to bounce back with Nosferatu, right? Anyways, that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for stopping by and stay frosty, friends.